Imagine a vehicle rolling quietly onto the world stage, not from Detroit, not from Silicon Valley, not from a luxury European lab, but from Africa. It's sleek, efficient, and completely self-powered. No plug, no charging station, no interruptions. And in 2025, the world is finally noticing. The headlines erupted first in Europe, then Asia, and eventually in Russia. Africa's self-powered EV shocks the globe. But it wasn't just attention. It was alarm. Because this wasn't a prototype or a conceptual model. It was real. It was functional. And it was already outperforming traditional EVs in endurance, efficiency, and sustainability. Inside Moscow's innovation corridors, analysts huddled over the live data. Graphs, telemetry, and live feed images showed what the rest of the world was struggling to believe. The vehicle had completed 5,000 miles without any external power source, traveling across diverse terrains and climates while maintaining stability. Cities, highways, and deserts, no environment slowed it down. Russia's response wasn't public at first. No press release, no social media statements. Just a quiet shift in strategy. Invitations were sent to African engineers. Meetings were requested behind closed doors. Questions weren't about if the technology worked, they were about how to integrate it. Meanwhile, the vehicle continued its demonstration tours. European highways saw it silently passing traditional EVs, its energy metrics recorded and verified by independent institutions. Each demonstration fueled speculation, but the numbers were undeniable. Efficiency levels that should have required vast battery banks were achieved with compact, scalable modules. The key wasn't raw power, it was continuous energy recovery and management, a system few engineers outside of Africa fully understood. As the media debated, policymakers realized the implications. If such vehicles were adopted globally, dependency on traditional energy grids would collapse. Supply chains would shift. Transportation infrastructure would need rethinking. And nations like Russia, with strategic energy interests, could not afford to ignore the breakthrough. The invitation to collaborate came with urgency. We need access to the technology before it scales. There's no room for delay. For the African team, the challenge wasn't just proving capability anymore. It was navigating the delicate terrain of geopolitics, international collaboration, and intellectual independence. On the road, the EV remained indifferent. Mountains, valleys, urban sprawls. It moved silently, consistently, and predictably. The passengers didn't cheer. The world watching didn't understand yet. But the message was clear. A new era of mobility had arrived, and it was no longer confined to traditional powers. Russia's involvement wasn't just a story about technology, it was a statement about global strategy. The world had always expected innovation to come from established centers. Africa was rewriting that expectation, and the implications were already rippling across every continent. As the EV approached its next demonstration city, analysts, media outlets, and government offices all asked the same question quietly. If Africa can do this, how long before it's everywhere? Because once a self-powered system like this exists in one country, the race is no longer about who invents it first, it's about who adapts fastest. As the EV cruised through the streets of its next city, the contrast between its quiet operation and the bustling urban chaos around it was impossible to ignore. Traditional vehicles emitted noise, heat, and the subtle stress of consumption, while this self-powered marvel glided through traffic like a system entirely detached from conventional constraints. Cameras captured every angle. From overhead drones to roadside smartphones, every observer recorded what seemed almost surreal, a car that didn't stop to refuel, didn't hesitate in traffic, and didn't drain the grid. The consistency was mesmerizing. Engineers leaned forward over their monitors, adjusting calculations that had been considered fixed for decades. Back in Russia, high-level meetings were underway. Officials were no longer debating whether to study the technology, they were planning strategies to integrate it into national programs. Military, industrial, and transportation departments quietly requested detailed reports. The reasoning was simple: a self-powered EV wasn't just a car. It was a mobile energy platform, capable of reducing dependency on imported fuel, stabilizing supply chains, and even powering other systems in remote regions. Meanwhile, the African team remained focused on the technology itself. Each module, each energy recovery system, each engineering decision had been painstakingly designed to operate without interruption. They weren't concerned with headlines or geopolitical shifts. Their focus was precision, reliability, and proving that the system could scale globally. As the vehicle reached 2,500 miles into its demonstration route, questions began emerging in international media. Is this the end of range anxiety? Could traditional EVs survive in this new landscape? How long before other nations try to replicate the system? Analysts debated the mechanics, yet none could fully explain the combination of energy efficiency, regenerative systems, and autonomous management embedded within the vehicle. Observers on the road began noticing patterns that reinforced the disruption. The EV didn't just move, it optimized its own performance in real time. Minor adjustments in aerodynamics, regenerative braking, and energy distribution occurred automatically. No human input was needed beyond driving. The vehicle effectively managed its own system, ensuring optimal performance regardless of external conditions. As evening approached, a subtle but powerful realization began to settle among everyone paying attention. This vehicle wasn't just a technological marvel, it was a paradigm shift. Every mile it traveled proved that Africa's innovation could challenge and potentially surpass the expectations of established global powers. The world wasn't just watching, it was quietly recalibrating. The question on everyone's mind was no longer if this technology worked. It was how quickly it would spread and which nations would adapt fast enough to avoid being left behind. And somewhere in the observation centers, engineers and strategists alike understood the most unsettling truth. Africa's self-powered EV wasn't just an invention. It was a statement of capability, and the world had just begun to listen. Grid demand would change if self-powered vehicles became mainstream. Even tech investors began scrutinizing Africa's energy sector with new intensity. On the streets, ordinary citizens began noticing the car not as a novelty, but as an example of reliability. Fleet operators, delivery services, and long-distance drivers observed its efficiency and endurance, realizing that the assumptions they had built their businesses around, charging infrastructure, battery longevity, operational downtime, were suddenly being challenged. In Russia, the strategy meetings became more than technical inquiries. They evolved into geopolitical discussions. How to incorporate, collaborate, and potentially scale this technology without losing national advantage. The self-powered EV wasn't just a car. It represented a redefinition of mobility, energy independence, and global competitiveness. Meanwhile, the African engineering team remained focused, quietly monitoring live telemetry from the EV. Each mile added more confirmation that their designs weren't anomalies or lucky experiments. They were systems capable of consistent, scalable performance. Engineers took note of minor variations in efficiency across different terrains and temperatures, but the vehicle consistently optimized itself in real time, proving its resilience. Media coverage spread faster than ever. Analysts, skeptics, and enthusiasts debated what the success of this vehicle meant for the future of transportation. The common thread: no one had ever seen anything like it. The combination of reliability, endurance, and independence from conventional infrastructure defied decades of automotive orthodoxy. As the EV crossed state lines in the late afternoon, observers quietly realized another important fact: the journey was becoming symbolic. It was no longer just a demonstration. It had become a message to the world. A message that innovation isn't confined to traditional centers of power and that the next era of technology might not follow the rules everyone expected. By the 4,500-mile mark, whispers of partnerships and collaborations began circulating. Countries not traditionally associated with automotive innovation reached out, seeking insight, access, and the chance to understand how Africa had leapfrogged traditional energy and EV paradigms. Yet, through it all, the EV remained indifferent. No fanfare, no special treatment, no shortcuts. It continued on its path with the same quiet precision that had defined the entire journey. And that, more than anything else, became the true statement. Innovation doesn't need approval, attention, or applause. It only needs to work. As the EV approached the 4,800-mile mark, the implications of its journey began to crystallize in every sector it touched. Transportation planners in Europe began redrafting infrastructure proposals. Grid operators in Asia modeled scenarios where large fleets of self-powered vehicles could operate independently of conventional electricity networks. Even environmental organizations noted the potential impact. A vehicle that consumed no fuel, generated no emissions, and required no external charging could dramatically shift global carbon projections. On the road, the EV remained calm, unwavering, almost indifferent to the attention it was drawing. Its systems continued to self-optimize, adjusting to subtle changes in terrain, temperature, and load without human intervention. Every observer, engineer, journalist, or policymaker recognized that this was no ordinary machine. It was a fully autonomous energy platform disguised as a car. In Moscow, strategic sessions had escalated. The Russian government wasn't just interested. They were planning for integration, adaptation, and long-term collaboration. Discussions of energy independence, transportation modernization, and even national security quietly centered on the possibilities unlocked by a single African innovation. Meanwhile, social media buzzed quietly but intensely. Footage of the EV crossing landmarks, traversing deserts, and merging into congested city streets circulated globally. Unlike viral stunts or flashy demonstrations, these clips carried credibility. They were unedited, verified, and backed by real-time data. The narrative was shifting. Skepticism gave way to cautious respect, and respect began to edge toward fascination. At 4,900 miles, the EV entered a sprawling metropolitan area. Traffic slowed naturally around it, not out of curiosity, but instinct. Drivers sensed something different, a technology operating beyond their usual experience. The vehicle didn't accelerate dramatically, didn't flaunt itself, and didn't call attention. Its power was silent, its capability unquestionable. Observers in control centers noticed something remarkable. Even under city traffic conditions, frequent stops, and variable loads, energy metrics remained steady. The vehicle didn't just survive the journey, it thrived in every environment. For the African engineers, this was the moment of quiet triumph. Years of design, experimentation, and testing had culminated in a system that validated itself in real-world conditions across thousands of miles. Every calculation, every hypothesis, every innovation was confirmed. Their technology worked as intended. The world outside continued to watch, but now the narrative was different. Countries, corporations, and institutions were no longer debating if this was possible. They were now asking when and how to adopt it. And somewhere, quietly, the EV pressed on toward its final destination, a vehicle whose journey had begun as a test, but whose impact was already rewriting the rules of mobility, energy, and global innovation. The question that lingered in every mind watching was no longer about distance or capability. It was this. By the 4,950-mile mark, the realization hit every observer simultaneously. This wasn't just a test run anymore. It was a proof of concept for a global paradigm shift. Governments, energy corporations, and tech innovators all began recalculating their assumptions. What had once been theoretical, self-powered, grid-independent mobility was now undeniably real. The EV moved through a late afternoon cityscape, blending into ordinary traffic. Its presence was subtle, almost unnoticeable, yet every display, sensor, and camera recording it told the same story: limitless endurance, perfect efficiency, and seamless adaptation to any environment. Meanwhile, international discussions had escalated. Russia formally requested detailed technical briefings from the African engineering team, not for commentary, but for actionable collaboration. Other nations followed suit quietly. Private sector leaders began exploring partnerships and pilot programs. The momentum was unstoppable because the technology had proven itself without hype, spectacle, or marketing. It only needed to function. On the road, engineers monitoring the live feed noticed something extraordinary. Even under heavy city congestion and variable loads, the energy system showed no degradation. Every minor fluctuation in temperature, friction, or electrical demand was corrected automatically. The car was not just self-powered, it was self-stabilizing. As night fell, the vehicle approached its final checkpoint. Observers held their breath, not because failure was expected, but because the scale of success was overwhelming. Miles, data points, and efficiency metrics had all exceeded predictions. The car's journey had become a living demonstration of a future that many had dismissed as impossible. When the EV rolled past the 5,000-mile mark, silence filled the monitoring centers. No celebration, no cheers, just acknowledgement. Every person watching understood that the rules of mobility, energy, and innovation had shifted in an instant. The African engineering team remained calm, quietly reviewing the live telemetry. Their focus was not fame or approval, it was validation. The system had worked exactly as designed, proving that a continent often underestimated could leapfrog established powers in technology and innovation. As the vehicle disappeared into the horizon, the final message was clear. The era of conventional constraints, range anxiety, dependency on the grid, reliance on fuel, was ending, and the world had no choice but to adapt. As the EV disappeared into the horizon under the fading light, the world collectively realized it had witnessed more than a test. It had witnessed a redefinition of possibility. No headlines, no dramatic announcements, no spectacles could match the quiet authority of a vehicle that simply worked consistently and sustainably. Governments, corporations, and energy strategists scrambled to understand, adapt, and integrate. Policies, infrastructure, and business models were suddenly outdated. The assumptions that had governed mobility for over a century were no longer relevant. Meanwhile, the African engineering team watched, focused but calm. They had proven their vision, their innovation, and their resilience. The car's 5,000-mile journey was not a stunt. It was a statement. Africa had entered the global technological arena, and it would shape the future on its own terms. The vehicle, silent and unassuming, rolled on, its motion a metaphor for unstoppable progress. And the message to the world was unmistakable. The future has arrived, and it doesn't wait for anyone.